In this session, we are going to study about another important class of functions. First, let's understand the problem and then we shall move towards a solution. So let's take a simple example that suppose we have to define a function which can add two integers which are supplied by user at runtime. So definitely we can write a function prototype something like sum me, and we can specify two values a and b, and then we can write the procedure to simply sum these values and return the sum. It's a straightforward programming. Now the problem statement becomes generic in the sense that we have to write a function which can accept any number of arguments. So basically the function should be able to add two values also, three values also, four values also, 100 values also, and probably a lakh values also. So we cannot endlessly keep on defining functions to do this because we cannot define lakhs of functions to perform this task for us. So for example, had there been only two requirements, we could have said let's say define one more function sum2, and we could say a b c are three integers and capture the sum in. Well, possible, but you cannot endlessly keep on defining functions and functions. Like first you define functions which accepts two arguments, then you define functions which accept three arguments, then you define a function which accepts, let's say, four arguments, and probably keep on going endlessly, and then define a function that probably accepts 100 arguments or so. So this is not the right style, or this is not a possible style to achieve the objective. This thing that I am talking to you all right now is not something very new. It's not something that you haven't seen it, but we do not know how to implement it is another question. For example, we all would have seen in our work with C or C++ that in C definitely we would have seen functions like scanf and printf. In printf, you can write a long string which can actually have any number of format specifiers like %s, %d, %f. There's no limit on the number of arguments that can be passed to print function. So if you think the print function would have been implemented to work with 0 arguments, with 1 arguments, with 2 arguments, or even with thousands of arguments. So that's the capability of a print function. Similarly, we have to define a sum function which can accept maybe no values, in which case it can return 0, or which can accept one value, two value, three value, or hundreds or thousands of values to give us the sum of the values supplied. Technically, what we are talking of is called as ellipses or variable argument functions. So in variable argument functions, the number of arguments can actually be a variable. How technically we achieve it in Python is the task at hand for this session. And let us say I have to define a function called generic sum, and this time, of course, I cannot say a comma b comma c because I cannot say that this function accepts one argument or two argument or three argument, but this function accepts actually variable number of arguments. The method to achieve is we can say star arg. Arg is any variable name. I'll also show what arg prints. So since this is a known functionality, I can right now only brief that this arg actually refers to a tuple of values. And if there's a tuple of values, we can iterate over the tuple and do whatever we want. So in our case, we are interested in calculating the sum, so I'll initialize a variable summer is equal to 0 and just iterate over the tuple with the for loop for lm in arg, and then I write summer is equal to summer plus lm, and then I return my summer. So probably if you have noticed, now this arg is a tuple, we'll see the print value also, and if you want to justify our argument that it's a tuple, we can even print its type. So we'll see what arg is, we'll see what the type of arg is. Then what this function clearly for loop is doing is it's iterating over the values in the tuple and summing them up. So in this case, this will work even if we pass 2 values, 3 values, 4 values, or 10 values. Let's take an example, and I say val is equal to, I'll copy this, and I print it. Then this time I take a bigger set, 3, 6, 8, 9, 12. And I can take one more sample with all 3, let's say. And I'll save this as what technically we call this as ellipses. We run the module. Now let's analyze the output one by one. In the case 1 of calling generic sum, I passed 2, 3. So values while calling are simply passed as comma separated, but inside the function, this becomes a single tuple. So 2, 3, when it goes inside the function, this arg is a tuple of 2 and 3, and the type tuple justifies that it's a tuple. Then it iterates, and then we have sum of 2 and 3, which is 5. Similarly, in case 2, now we can pass more values like 3, 6, 8, 9, 12. Again, it's a tuple, and we can iterate over a tuple obviously to calculate the sum, and this is the sum. Similarly, you can have any number of arguments further, which will become a tuple inside, and then the same story continues. So this is how we can technically define a function with variable number of arguments, or technically we can call it as ellipses. This is a very interesting and useful feature for programming languages, and it's pretty simple in Python but very useful. Thank you.